Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Which is ironic because, your first point was like competition. What competition is there today?
Yeah, for all the talk about competition, certainly the Comcast and Verizons of the world do not like competition when it comes to the provision of internet service by public entities. As to the politics of it, there are some attempts to find these kind of loopholes with the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. There was some thought that the language in there would have potentially prohibited the distribution of funds from the federal government to the state if they had municipal broadband bans in place, because these funds are supposed to be distributed regardless of what kind of internet service provider, public, private, whatever, regardless of business model. That was not enough to change the law. Money is going to go to Pennsylvania, and it's going to be distributed, even though we have that law in place. It seems like they're just going to paper over that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we need the Ralph Nader for this movement, who is irrationally committed to making it happen. Otherwise, it won't happen. It's just too many obstacles, right?
There are a lot of obstacles for sure.
Leadership. Right, leadership is always needed. Is there an organization that is sort of trying to go in that direction of trying to, go and abolish it, one of these state laws in one way or the other, depending on what they can do? Is there anybody who's doing that?
Yeah. So I'm currently looking up. So Gigi Sohn, who was the Biden administration's nominee to fill the vacant seat at the FCC. Ultimately, she was railroaded by Republicans and a small number of Democrats. She's a very good public interest advocate in this space. She has joined an organization which is dedicated to the expansion of public broadband, though I'm blanking on the name right now. Gigi Sohn.
Yeah. How do you spell the last name?
SOHN.
HN. Gigi Sohn. Okay, I'll look her up. Yeah, because I think I don't know if you agree, probably agree with me, that there are sort of these very strategic, bottlenecks that once they get, taken care of, a lot of good stuff happens, right? A lot of problems get solved and so on and so forth. And like rural areas being able to get the the broad or the small, or like you were saying, like disadvantaged communities, right? There are lots and lots of pockets there, and you can't really be economically competitive today if you don't have, if you're a child, you don't have access to the internet. That just, and the impact there is massive in terms of the potential for them to become economically prosperous as they grow, and to stay out of trouble and so forth. So it's just massive, right? So it feels like it's a very strategic place to try to unblock what is being blocked today. So I'm thinking about the FTC, right? FTC, since Chair Khan, Lina Khan, took over, I think it was 2 years ago. She's been on a tear, trying to focus on these monopolies and basically either break them up or get them to be more accountable and so forth. What are your thoughts on that work, on the work by the FTC and what they've done so far, and where they've fallen short, and what what's coming up. I think a trial is coming up with Google. What are your thoughts, if you have any?
So my thoughts are Lena Khan has made a lot of enemies over the last couple of years as chairwoman of the FTC. Most Republicans dislike her. Many pro-business Democrats dislike her. Big tech despises her. Wall Street Journal has this weird obsession with her, and it is not a positive one, which is all to say she has made the right enemies. I one day would love to have her roster of enemies that I could say I have as well. I think she's a really important figure because she's ushered in a massive change in regulatory philosophy at the FTC, because last 40 plus years, really since the beginning of Reaganomics, the FTC has been basically a captured regulatory agency where folks who would go to work for the FTC would then go on to work for the big businesses that they were supposed to be regulating.
Yeah.
And folks who are working for these big businesses would then be hired by the FTC, this classic revolving door. And you had a regulatory philosophy, which is heavily influenced by the Chicago School, which did not see monopoly as a big problem, which was only concerned with short-term price effects. And Lena Khan is part of a new movement of regulations, what some folks call the neo-Brandesian approach to regulation, that looks at the harms of corporate mergers and consolidation and concentration, not just in terms of prices, but in terms of all kinds of nefarious effects. So it's not just about prices, but power for Lena Khan. She is, in my mind, probably the most effective person within the Biden administration. She, I think, understands those kind of bottlenecks that you described earlier that may fall out of public purview because they're not at the top of the agenda.
Right.
And she is very good at sniffing those out and bringing them to light. She has taken a very aggressive approach to reining in these companies. I think that is a very welcome development. That being said, right, she is a reformer, but probably not a radical, right? She is for making markets work better, right? For making competition work for their users rather than for big owners, but probably not the person who's going to usher in the kinds of public interest options that we need for the internet.
I think reformer is because I think she wants to get things to go back to prior to Bork and in the 80s. Right. I think the FTC was working pretty well, at least reasonably well before that. Before this fixation on price became the driving principle behind whether something is a monopoly or not, which was, I think, a joke in the sense that obviously monopolies are not about just price, about the ecosystem, about the customers, about the impact on the society, and about the impact on democracy, right? When you have these monopolies, right, of course they're going to have an outsized influence on on the political infrastructure, and that's not a good thing. Yeah, so I totally agree with you on that. Do you the thing about the FTC, number one is at the beginning when there was this massive anti-big tech thing feeling by the Republicans, I think they welcomed her at the beginning. I remember at the hearing at the very beginning, they were positive.
A bubble broke for her, yeah.
Right? They were like, hey, because she was coming in, and the fever against the big tech was, especially in 2020, and all that stuff, right? But I agree with you. Now she has a lot of enemies across the board, right?
And it really, it really gives lie to the kind of idea that the new Republican Party, as opposed to the old one, is now populist. It has a critique of big business, so forth, so on. Lena Khan, right, is kind of embodying that populist anti-monopoly ethos. And on case after case, she is being opposed almost universally by Republican Party, even with regards to Facebook, who Republicans at least pretend to dislike. There is currently through the FTC investigation into a merger between Facebook, Meta, and another company. I think it's a fitness company that basically all the Republicans have lined up in opposition to this investigation. So it really does show like who the real populists are, who takes corporate power seriously and who takes it as an exercise to exploit for political gains.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also establishment it also gives a lie to this big split between Republicans and Democrats, ideological. There are certain things where they are just corporate, they support the corporations, right? And I think establishment Democrats are getting a bit nervous about how much she's pushing, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Because their donors are starting to, make noise, and so they're trying to rein her in. I wonder. I mean, that's the tragedy. Well, maybe not the tragedy, but that's the nature of the quadrennial, presidency. So that if Biden is out, she's out, and then the first order of business probably um, is to probably appoint new members of the FTC and undo all that work. And so I don't how much. I mean, if you know how much of that work can be sort of enduring, not easily undone, or is it simply that she has gotten us to wake up to, which would be an accomplishment, right? Just to wake up to the fact that this is not necessarily the way things have to be, right? There's another way of doing it, and here's way to proceed. And so maybe public sentiment and also, sympathetic organizations out there will coalesce and will carry on the torch, of that cause. But what do you think that if let's say Trump or some other guy, God forbid, gets back in there, they'll just completely dismantle what has been done so far? Like they'll throw away the cases and so forth. Do you think?
Yeah, basically. I think that's what happened with, for example, the FCC when it turned over from Obama to Trump. I think at the FTC, where you have this new regulatory philosophy, I have a hard time, although I hope it would happen, believing that the public would mobilize to pressure the FTC to preserve the regulatory legacy of Lena Khan. It would be great if that happened, but it is kind of a position where there's not a lot of public scrutiny of the performance of the FTC. So they kind of operate kind of outside of these public feedback mechanisms. And without that kind of public accountability, if a Trump or a DeSantis comes back into office, I'm sure they will have all kinds of populist bluster about the woke corporations and big tech and so forth, so on. But when it comes to the brass tacks of doing what's in the interest of big business, I'm pretty confident that they would pursue that pretty aggressively.
Yeah, and I don't think they will lose coherence. They will just frame whatever the FTC was doing as big government intervening. And
Yeah.
so they'll just frame it like that, even though, this is government trying to do its job, which is to defend the public interest. They'll frame it as big government is bad and big business is bad. And then you ask, well, what is left? What is left is rhetoric, right? And lots of bluster and fluster and all that. So um, and so I go back to the guy that I admire quite a bit, even though we Democrats sometimes feel, if he only didn't run in the year 2000, he would be a hero, which is Ralph Nader, and how much he was able to do, to introduce so much legislation and so much protection of the consumer. As a leader, he was not by himself. He had a lot of folks, the Nader Raiders and all that, right? But that kind of leadership, I can see if somebody comes in with that kind of just tenacity, they would be able to, show how. I mean, the cases are, and the reason again, people will resonate to the fact that I am a slave of my internet, and the bill is too high, and if there's somebody's just driving just that one issue, right? and showing the example of how you can take something like that, that touches everybody, no matter whether you're Republican or Democrat and whatever it may be. Your bill is going to go down, and these monopolies are, you're going to have a choice, and they just drive that, right? So I wonder, like, why, with so many smart people out there and so many organizations out there like you and like many others, why don't we have somebody at the stature of Nader who's going to go after the big whales, right? The big thing, which is regulate the car industry. That's huge. Like when he was trying to do it, the car industry was a massive lobby, and he succeeded, right? He's the guy who brought the Freedom of Information Act, right? Which is massive, right? I mean, wow. I mean, how
Yeah.
many things we would, I mean, our democracy would be probably something even uglier. It's ugly today, but even uglier if you didn't have the FY, right? Think, why don't we have somebody who's driving like this? Because we have so much resources and people are a lot more educated and information is flowing a lot more freely than before. Why don't we have these big, you know, citizen advocates for the, or consumer advocates, which is what he was, that just go and confront Congress and just push, and if have you ever listened to a podcast? I mean, he appears on this podcast, the Nader Hour, every week, and I listen to him once in a while. The beauty about this guy is that he always delves into the minutia, right?
Yeah.
He talks about the stairs being broken, and you need to go use tort law to take care of that. He's not talking about big policy shit and all that. He goes to the bottom, he understands exactly what's going on. So he's passionate both in terms, he understands what's going on the ground. He has an understanding of the system. Is it the leadership? I don't want to simplify that. I'm not the history is made by men, women, great men and great women. But what do you think? We don't have somebody who's just driving like that. Somebody crazy, I'll call such a person.
So I think there are a couple of reasons. I think you're right to say there is a large potential base that would support really substantial regulation of tech. Potentially a very populist one. Again, if you look at questions of broadband, the number of folks who support things like net neutrality, things like states' rights local rights to build public broadband, the numbers are outrageously high and are across the aisle. There was great support for building public internet infrastructure, and there's a great hatred of Comcast and Verizon, just like there's a widespread hatred of the likes of Facebook and Google across the political spectrum. But you're right, the kinds of, though we're no longer in this moment of tech utopianism, we all are kind of tech critics now across the political spectrum, but the kinds of regulation that we would like to see happen are not yet forthcoming, for sure. Part of that, I think, is because if we're delving down into the minutiae of things, it's maybe hard to get people excited about that. But I think there's also a bigger question here regarding the lack of political imagination with regards to tech policy debates in this country. Oftentimes we're having these debates which are happening at the very, very tip of the iceberg, on the very, very margins of the actual issues at stake. So we're really kind of pursuing a very narrow, reformist, and oftentimes accommodationist agenda with regards to the big tech players. With regards to Comcast and Verizon, the big ISPs, we say it'd be nice to have some net neutrality, some oversight to make sure they're not engaging in discrimination of the traffic that flows over their network. But we should be content, more or less, with taming the telecom giants rather than slaying them. With regard to Facebook and Google, there's some small bore reforms that have been produced and are being debated. But again, it's about reining them in, making sure they're a little bit more accountable rather than doing something which really attacks their structural power.
Yeah. Well, let me share with you my theory, right? Probably it's wrong. I believe it's because we, let's call ourselves the progressives, because usually these are, causes that are led by progressive, right? we don't know how to talk. We don't know how to speak to folks who are not in our bubble. We talk
Yeah,
about net neutrality. What the hell is net neutrality?
it's a bad term. Yeah.
Right? What does it mean? Why don't I just go and say, do you hate Comcast? Yes. I hate Comcast. And I use the word hate. I don't use the word are you critical of, right? Don't use big words. Seriously, right? I say this with all sincerity. Again, I may be wrong, but the way I see us talking to folks, we talk about petitions, we talk about process, we talk about this, about that, as opposed to use a language every single person on the left and on the right, and whoever they are, who are focused on taking care of their family, paying the bills, and they don't give a shit about the big issues, even though those big issues are the issues that concern them because the way we talk about them. Maybe I'm wrong, but the way we go about talking about these issues and framing them and engaging and going out of our bubble. Are we gonna go to West Virginia where every house has a big Trump poster? Are we gonna go there? No, we don't. We stick in our bubbles and talk and so forth and all that, and then we wonder why we're not getting. I'll give you the reason why I'm sort of excited about this right now is because there was a thing that happened, I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago, of this guy, country song. I don't know if you've seen that. Did you see that? It was on
Yeah, the
CNN.
guy. Yeah, the guy outdoors with his guitar in Virginia.
With his guitar in Virginia, and he said, I'm not the Republican or Democrat. And he was basically just lambasting the people north of Richmond, which is Northern Virginia, which is DC, right?
Yeah.
And he was talking about those guys, and immediately it resonated. This guy, he was depressed 2 years ago. He just took his guitar and started talking. And I guarantee you that if we are going to get folks to be animated about things that concern them, it has to come from somebody who knows how to communicate viscerally in a way that people understand where he's coming from, as opposed to an academic or an intellectual. I'm talking about you and me and everybody that I know. I'm gonna blame myself first before I blame anybody else about how we are ineffective in terms of reaching out and just finding those issues that have nothing to do with are you Trumpist and all that, but have to do with how do I make your life easier? Would you like to sign up to get these guys, Comcast, right, to have competition, right, or to lower the prices, or to go into these neighborhoods and to force them? What can we do, and so on? What do you think about it? Is it too simplistic of me to
No,
get
I think
excited like this about that?
I think you nailed it on the head. I think lots of the ways we talk about tech policy is either very technocratic,
Yeah.
very bureaucratic, or very technical in ways that obfuscate the power at hand. I think we do need to recover the language of class, right? These issues are in many ways class issues. They have to do
Exactly.
with the fact that corporations have far too much power. They have far too much power over our digital lives. They have far too much power over our analog lives. And that in order to counter this power, we need some kind of politics of antagonism. So it's not that, well, let's work with Comcast to get something that's a little bit better, or let's work with Facebook to find a solution that is mutually beneficial for us all. In which case, why do I care, right? If Mark Zuckerberg has some little thing that is a thorn in his behind, if I am that person in Virginia, I don't care.
I don't
Right?
care.
I think we need to do a better job of illustrating who benefits from these tech policy issues and who does not. Those kind of very clear, sober understandings of class, of power, are things we absolutely need to bring to the foray, and we as academics suck at it.
Well, not just academics. I think policymakers and people who think that the way to reform things, and I don't believe, is from the top down. I don't think it's from the top down. I think from the bottom up. Just like I really admire what Chattanooga did. They were able to do something what I think is just admirable, right? They did it, and they benefited the real people, right?
Yeah.
In a very concrete way, day in and day out. Children, right? You want to find out, you want to learn about, some kind of disease or whatever. You can go and educate yourself, right? I mean, these are real life impacts on many people on a daily basis. And I really like, I admired what they did on that front. And so it frustrates me, like, why aren't we doing more of that? It would be really interesting to see how did they go about doing that. I think probably is Tennessee one of the states that doesn't have one of those laws, I'm assuming, right? That block.
Well, they do have laws in place that block the EPB from Chattanooga's internet service provider from expanding beyond the city limits. But they do have some regulations in place to prevent it.
But they still managed to take care of their city, right?
Yes, Chattanooga did. Yeah.
Yeah. Has anybody written extensively about that that case? Because sounds like some ripe for lessons learned, or lessons could be learned.
So I'm currently doing research on that particular case. There is some stuff, but it is very empirical minded. It is things like evaluating, what the net benefit to the local economy of Chattanooga by virtue of having this public internet. Those kind of very narrow questions. There is some stuff on, but in terms of the politics of it, there's not.
Or the history, like just who started with this thing and what did they do? What did they face? Like somebody goes down there and spends a year just talking to all the folks who did it, and then comes with the real story. Because change happens at the micro level, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I do think there's an issue there in terms of complexity. Because in Chattanooga or other places, you just get the internet service. You pay and that's it. Elsewhere, we're talking about, with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, all these very complex subsidy schemes, all these private-public partnerships, which are going to line the pockets of Comcast and Verizon, and surely will probably not connect people in the way that are expected. And there is something beyond whether it's the right policy or not in terms of the politics of it, which is easier to understand, which is more powerful when the message is as clear as, hey, we built our own internet and it works better than Comcast.
Right. I mean, that's a powerful message, and hopefully inspiring. Well, like every single time when I am having a lot of fun, the hour has just flown by. David Elliot Berman, thank you so much for making the time. I'm going to make sure that I link to as many articles as possible that you've written, or if you can share with me anything that I can share with my audience in terms of the place where you'll have your episode, that would be fabulous. So your postdoc, what's the next step for you in terms of a career? What do you think your options are, and where do you want to go?
I want to stay in academia. Graduated about less than a year ago, 10, 11 months ago. So idea is to get into tenure track. Hopefully that happens this job cycle, but we'll see. I don't want to really think too hard about what happens if that doesn't happen, but yeah.
So are you a researcher, or where is your passion? Research or teach or both?
So both, but in my capacity as a postdoc, it is dedicated to research.
To researching, okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'll tell you what, if you at some point get bored of that world, which is actually a good place to be, right? University is nice to go and research and all that.
Sure.
You already have a track record of being an activist or being somebody who does things. So I'm not worried about you being able to contribute to the greater good. David, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, take care.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.